t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly chat show on the highs and lows of European politics. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up this week, after years of squabbling, Brussels and London are friends again. This week saw the much anticipated EU-UK summit take place, the first of its kind since the messy divorce. The gathering, that saw EU leaders get VIP treatment, concluded with a deal on security, fish and a boat trip down the Thames. We take a look at the small print and ask if this really is a reset. And what about Pfizergate? The embarrassing scandal refers to the EU Commission President's refusal to release her text messages with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla during the COVID-19 vaccine negotiations. Earlier this month, the EU's top court ruled that this was wrong. We're taking a look at the political and legal implications of covering up the biggest contract the European Commission has ever signed. A warm welcome to our guests this weekend. Bruno Waterfield, Brussels correspondent for The Times. Cynthia Niwerku, Irish MEP from Renew Europe. And Yves Berconcini, former president of the European Movement and currently a European politics professor. Lovely to have you all with us. Thanks for being here. But as usual, let's just hear why a number of EU leaders started their week in London. Take a look.
Once they were family, then they were neighbours. Now they want to be partners again. The first major EU-British summit was a first step in that direction. Before Brexit, British prime ministers would travel to Brussels 4 times a year or more for summits with the rest of the EU. After Brexit, those summits stopped. Now the Labour government in Britain envisages new and regular top-level interactions with the EU. Something that is appreciated in Brussels, but has been hotly criticised by His Majesty's opposition. The London meeting was called a surrender summit by the Tories and the Great British Sellout by Reform UK. And what about the EU? Can Brussels trust the British again today? Can both sides produce something meaningful in light of common challenges?
So there you go, quite something. I guess this summit is a follow-up to the visit of Keir Starmer. He was in Brussels a couple of months back. Bruno, you've been reporting on Brexit for years. Was this a surrender summit or was it a reset summit in your view?
It was a summit. I mean, it was a meeting in London. They've only been having the so-called reset negotiations since February when Keir Starmer came and spoke to a dinner at the European Council. They seem to have done quite a lot. It was pretty serious. We know it was pretty serious because Keir Starmer only heard about the fishing deal when the EU demanded it on Sunday evening. So it was dramatic as well. I mean, it was dramatic and it felt quite tough. So in fact, Costa and von der Leyen were on their way to Brussels when it was still,
being negotiated.
It was still waiting for Coreper to give it.
That's the thing. It felt a bit like the blast from the past, right? Those late night negotiations. That's indeed how it was clinched, the deal. Was it a success, Cynthia, in your view, this summit?
Absolutely. It's a great start. As we say, os Gaeilge túsma leathna hibre, which translates into a good start is half the work. I think Europe has to reach out to former partners and new partners and unexpected partners, perhaps, within the rule of law and within proper functioning democracies. I think Canada would be a likely ally as well, and I would love to see the Commission and indeed my own party, Renew Europe, we will reach out to the new government there. But yes, this is a good reset. This is a great start. Nobody interviewed the fish to find out how they felt about going on their holidays or having these extra bonuses. I saw lots of memes about that. I don't mean to overjest, but I'm very pleased for the fishers of Ireland that the agreement continues. It has been elongated because that was hard fought for in terms of Irish fishers. So yes, I'd like to see this summit being built on. The whole geopolitical structure has been completely upset by President Trump, and we need to think afresh.
Yves, what about you? Did you follow the ins and outs of this summit, or have you kind of lost interest in anything related to Brexit?
No, but I would say this is not about Brexit. It's not about a new story, a new stage. We are still neighbours. We were neighbours. That is a basic fact. And but this was managed when you were more easily, I must say, when you were a member. The UK was member of the EU. There was a democratic choice to leave. It was accepted. Harsh negotiation, so a divorce was not an easy task. I mean, a new thing, by the way, for the Europeans. So, but now it's over. But the interdependence has to be managed differently. And we have a framework agreement. We had the exit treaties. It's a new phase. It's to go forward. And what you have said, in a very different geopolitical context. Because not only we need
it's a new world
to manage the interdependence, but we need to be stronger together. Yes. Facing Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, and all the global challenges.
It's also a new world for the British people themselves, and perhaps Bruno can speak best about this. He is British, but from what I hear from my British friends, they regret Brexit. It's costing them dearly in their pocket. So it is a good time to initiate.
There are polls on this, right? Over one and two said
I think you have to be careful when you look at polling. Polling is polling. Rejoining the EU would be quite a prospect, it would be quite a process, and I wouldn't expect those polls to be the same at the end of it. There are people who in Britain, and there are people who see the strategic element of this so-called reset as the path to take us beyond the red lines of not joining the single market and customs union. It has to be said that the actual substance, the document, the common understanding document, particularly, is very, very general. Very, very general indeed. So there's a lot of small print that still needs to be done. There are a lot of very, very difficult, complicated and potentially very controversial questions to do with alignment, particularly on so-called veterinary standards. The youth mobility debate, which the EU parked in order not to destroy the summit effectively, is still very, very, very difficult. And I think one of the things that the Europeans need to understand a bit more is that once Britain leaves, Britain views things slightly differently. Lots of European countries, if they had to join Erasmus now, would have to have a very difficult discussion about giving a lot of money to well-off middle-class university students and taking that money away perhaps from other people. Now, Britain is going to have that debate, and Europeans will go, how can you even talk about this or think about this glorious project? But once you're outside, you have to think about things in a different way.
Except that it might cost them in relation to the likes of what you've just referenced, but they're also going to benefit hugely as well if there are easier paths for them. And we know that the British economy is suffering and suffering badly, and it is costing. I mean, it's expected that Brexit is going to cost billions by the year 2035. I mean, just take a small shopkeeper in England, someplace, maybe Kent, your home area. I mean, they are inundated with custom duties, papers and forms and all of that because they're outside of the European Union. Well, yeah. We have to make life easier for those small business people.
I just wanted to bring in a voice of a man who was actually present at the London Summit. The EU Trade Commissioner, Maros Sefcovic. Our reporter, Shona Murray, sat down with him this week and asked him if he thought it was a success.
We are eternal neighbours, we are the biggest trading partners, and we are closest allies. So if we want to restore the bridge building among the young people between the EU and the UK, if we want to make it easier for the farmers, for the fishers through the SPS agreement, and if you want to make it even better for the people from Northern Ireland, I think these are all very important messages, and I hope that also the people in UK would see it like that, and the practical results and practical implementation of the agreements will just prove that.
Maros Sefcovic there, but Eve, I don't think really that was the message going down in the UK.
No, but I think the divorce metaphor is accurate. You know, when you divorce, it's not for practical reasons, and it's a mess. And the divorce, the Brexit, as you have mentioned, on practical level, it's not good. But it was more of an emotional reaction, a political reaction. There was the relation was uneasy, and then a slight majority of the British voter decided to leave. It's better not to get back to this. Now we are neighbours. There is a new reality. Again, the divorce papers were signed. It's a different face. And when we look at the world, there are common challenges to be faced. And if I may add, faced, for example, the Russian threat, not only the UK are very, very key actors, not only they are key actors, but in any case, as Europeans, we will probably have coalitions of the willing. We will have, it's not the EU, including inside the EU, you will have neutral countries, including your countries,
Ireland.
I believe.
Yes.
You will have pro-Russia countries such as Hungary. So it will be intergovernmental operation within which the UK should play a key role. So
And
it's
they
a
always
brand new
did. I
reality.
mean, since Brexit on defence and security, they've still played a key role, and the channels have still been open very much.
No, I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, the defence and security is important. It's mainly important because of the industrial aspects of meeting NATO defence targets. But I really would be careful about the narrative that Britain is some sort of kind of economic basket case. It isn't. It's got higher growth rates than the Eurozone, for example. Europe has a general problem of virtually stagnant GDP growth. The government is hoping to get a bit of a GDP boost out of this. It's hoping, particularly via actually the energy component of the deal, which actually might be much more significant because we can't read it because we haven't got the small
So,
print.
Bruno, do you think Brexit was good for Britain?
I would. I mean, I have my own view on that. I would just say to you that Brexit happened. There are many things that the government wants to do in Britain. In fact, probably any government would want to do in Britain that requires it to use some of the things it can do now, particularly in terms of managing its border. And all governments would want to do that. And one of it's really interesting, if you talk to someone from France, maybe someone from the Netherlands, and some of the things that Britain is able to do in terms of its border management, there are quite a lot of EU countries which would like to be able to do that. At the same time, they feel the chafing restrictions of business visas, NHS surcharges. So I think it's very important for people to realise that Britain is a different country after Brexit.
It's a different country.
It's still a
after Brexit.
European. It's still a European. It's still very much a European country. But I really, this isn't. I think you made a really good point. This isn't about Brexit anymore.
No, it's not. But it's very important. Just Keir Starmer and the Labour government. That it's fantastic that they are part of the coalition of the willing. That they are discussing security and defence. Because if we had a virtual map of the world in front of us now, we would see the English Channel is so strategic to the security and the defence of Europe. And what's beside or what's neighbouring the English Channel? Ireland. So Ireland is the little island is the first point of contact of all those interconnectors that are coming from America and making their way up into mainland Europe. So it's vital that we have England at the table or Britain at the table.
Of course, well, Ireland lost a best friend around the EU summit table when Britain did leave the European Union. But you mentioned Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He's obviously trying to sell this deal as a win, this summit as well. He was on Twitter as well this week saying that Brits can now sail through the e-gates at European airports. He said you want to go on your holiday, you want to get to the beach as fast as possible, because these are the kind of day-to-day practicalities that
but come on. Look, all that's happened on e-gates is the European Commission has given legal clarity that there is no legal reason why e-gates can't be used with British passports. Still completely up to the member states. The only time when people will be able to use e-gates is at congestion moments. Say you've got free planes from Heathrow full of Brits arriving at, Benidorm or something, then they'll be allowed to use the e-gates. If there's a German and a French plane in front of them, they'll have to wait still. So this is one of the problems, actually, with this whole process, is that the Starmer government has been very secretive, if not downright dishonest sometimes about this negotiation, and he is overhyping elements such as e-gates.
Yeah,
And is Keir Starmer, is he more popular outside the UK perhaps?
Well, certainly, yeah, a smart man,
Macron's well.
leading a very key actor in terms of defense and security. Again, a new face, because that's also why we're not about Brexit, because the Conservatives, which were instrumental in the Brexit divorce, they're out now. So he was a newcomer, decent politician, good image, and trying then to engage a cooperation. It's not about membership any longer, at least at this stage, not from Starmer. And then, yes, he's well perceived as someone, including able to, he casted some compromises on phytosanitary standards, for example. It's not surrender, but it's a spirit of compromise with the EU. Because if you want to have a more fluid access to the market, or for people at the airport, you need to comply with EU rules, including if you don't define them any longer. That's it.
I think Keir Starmer is showing how to be an effective politician, both within and without. And I mean, losing the pitch at home for a while, perhaps, and we have seen the rise of Farage and all of his cabal in terms of council seats and so forth. Perhaps that has got to be done for a while until the outward politics, the mainland Europe politics, is sorted. So I think Keir Starmer, of course, he's treading a fine line, but I think he's doing it effectively and far better than we saw the performance of the Tories.
And he's trying to follow up on what he promised, which was indeed to improve
He's a
relations.
decent Anglo-Saxon as well, seen from the continent, and the contrast with Donald Trump is so obvious that...
How would your
it's a good
readers be
point
feeling
for-
about all this praise for Keir
point for
Starmer,
Starmer.
Bruno?
Well, I think Keir Starmer's not a popular politician. He's very much a sort of a product of a certain part of the elite. He was a public prosecutor. That's not a kind of populist role in Britain. He's awkward.
But it's a very honourable role. A public prosecutor is a very transparent, honourable, respected role. And I respect him for that role. And I take on board what you're saying. And of course, you've got your finger more so on the pulse of the British nation. And I have seen Farage and all the council seats that were won and all of that. But I still believe Britons were misled. Sorry to go back to the Brexit debate, but Britons were misled with regards to the fact that there wouldn't be as many immigrants coming if they voted to get out of Europe. But in actual fact, that didn't come to pass.
So you're now saying it's okay for Keir Starmer to mislead people because
I don't
he's a good
believe
guy.
he is misleading people.
He's not. They are not. There are many people in his
agree with
party
you.
who are extremely unhappy about the fact that the government hasn't even consulted its own people about the trade-offs that are being made, right? This is part of the world post-Brexit as well. But inside the EU, we all pretend there are no trade-offs. It's the European method of consensus building. But when you're outside, there are trade-offs. He is making trade-offs. Most people probably would agree that those trade-offs are worth it. But I think you have to have a grown-up discussion, because one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit is because they're sick of being talked down to.
But
They're sick of being treated like children.
Here's a grown-up figure for you. A Cambridge econometrics report suggested that the UK will be £311 billion worse off by 2035 due to leaving the EU. That's what Keir Starmer is trying to address. Also, not only the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, according to the Governor of the Bank of England, Mr Bailey said that Brexit has weighed heavily on the British economy and relations have to be rebuilt. So we have to deal with reality
We
as
were
well.
also told that, that Britain would fall apart, within weeks of the Brexit vote, that it would be a sort of 1930s style.
Well, it may be a
repression.
slower,
So we've been told
falling apart that we're witnessing.
We've been told a lot
But
of
it is
things.
labouring under Brexit.
And one
It
thing
still
that is clear is Nigel Farage was the Brexit star, if you like, one of the politicians who helped bring about Brexit. And he still is a star. And we've seen him as well on Twitter this week saying that Labour have sold out our fishing industry, all in the name of closer ties to a, quote, ever diminishing political union. Do you miss Nigel Farage around here?
Not really. Actually, I think the European Parliament either. Again, a divorce is costly. These people lied. You can have a divorce, I divorce, for example, but you can't say it's not going to be costly. And that was the problem with the Brexit campaign by Farage, but not only Farage. It was not enough, by Boris Johnson. Now we have new partners. It's not about union any longer. It's about partnership, which is, of course, even more important in today's world. Farage is not there. Farage is a commenter. Of course, he's still there in the UK, but
He's
for
a rising
domestic
star, right?
reasons, I'm afraid, for domestic
Well, he is
reasons.
at the
but this
moment.
is how to
Farage
be-
doesn't quite know
to be
what
dealt
he
with.
stands for. He flip-flops on an awful lot of things. We've seen that over the years. I mean, Farage is populist, like our president across the pond, President Trump. So, I mean, what suits him to get that political traction, he will say it. It may not necessarily be authentic. It may not be completely true, as we've seen during Brexit.
But look,
domestically,
Farage is no longer a Brexit anti-EU campaigner because that dog has barked.
That's the flip-flop.
That dog has barked. But
That's my point.
Even though there on Twitter he was...
The roots of what led to the Brexit vote are still there very much in terms of people are very aware that the institutions of government, the economy doesn't really work for them. And let's not pretend that Farage is some kind of weird English, British exception. Look at across Europe. Across Europe, maybe not in Ireland, but across Europe, there are people who are very much like Farage or much more extreme than Farage. Even there is a malaise, and it's a malaise that isn't. I mean, I always tell people that the Brexit vote was a real European coming of birth. It was a real European moment for Britain. As Michel Barnier used to say over and over again, he used to say to people, don't think it couldn't happen here.
Yes, but the malaise that is growing now and that we're witnessing, not only in terms of Farage, but in terms of other countries you've referenced there, Bruno, the malaise of the rise of the far right is doing severe damage and will continue to do severe damage unless I'm talking about myself as a parliamentarian in the Parliament, unless we stand up for the centrist democratic rule of law issues and rights and responsibilities. We have to hold the centre, because it is quite distressing when we see what's happening in Budapest and the Pride Parade being banned at the end of June, and a delegation, including myself, from the Parliament going to support the LGBTQI community, that it has come to that basic rights of people in that particular group are not being vindicated, they're not being respected, and that's only one example. And if we let that go, who's next? Women, children, older people. It will continue.
Eve, you're taking...
No, I agree to say that there's a competition, a harsh competition between nationalism, isolationism, everywhere in Europe and even beyond. Look at the US. That is true. What I state is that the temptation to leave the EU is not there in any single 27 member state, that the Brexit is not a good advertisement for this, frankly. And that, yes, now what is at stake even more, that we have the Russian aggression of Ukraine, the Chinese harsh economic competition, Donald Trump leaving us and not incarnating the Western world any longer, is what are we doing as Europeans? As Europeans. And the good thing for the UK is that European does not mean only European Union. So we need to be more united, because, as Cameron had said during the campaign, we're stronger together.
And on that point, we can bring this conversation to a close. But stay with us here on Euro News, because shortly we'll be back and we'll be talking about a recent win for transparency in a major case taken against the European Commission. See you soon here on Euro News. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, our weekly chat show here on Euro News, where we just take a look back at the big news of the week. And one story we wanted to talk through was the so-called Pfizergate. An EU court has said that the EU Commission violated transparency rules by failing to give access to text messages between the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, at the peak of the COVID vaccination negotiations. Back in 2023, the New York Times journalist Martina Stevis filed a complaint, hence the ruling coming out now. For more on this case, we spoke to the European politics professor, Georgios Vassalos.
The recent EU court ruling on Pfizergate is a victory for democracy, as far as transparency is a prerequisite of democracy. Text messages are considered to be documents and therefore should be accessible to all EU citizens. It is not the first time that Ursula von der Leyen finds herself involved in such a scandal. When she was defense minister in Germany, communications on contracts with military affairs consultants were also deleted. So there is a very personal Ursula touch in this scandal. Journalists reminded that transparency is mandatory. It is not optional, and it can certainly not be à la carte.
Georgios Vassalos there on what's a big win for journalism and for transparency. You're disagreeing there, Bruno?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be absolutely honest about Brussels. In Brussels, almost every decision takes place shrouded in secrecy with very little public availability. The whole classification of EU documents, starting at Limité right on up, is about preventing openness. For example, I think these texts could be... I mean, actually, also the ECJ ruling is actually more of a slap of a wrist for the Commission, because it actually said the Commission hadn't explained itself properly. It did not order the release of the texts if they still exist. I would love to see the texts, because they were a very, very interesting theory. Not the conspiracy theory idea of Pfizer and the vaccines, but it was actually a very, very interesting period when the Commission was beginning to get very heavy-handed. You remember all the talk of vaccine wars, seizing factories perhaps, or interrupting the supply chain. And I would be very, very interested, because I suspect that a lot of those text messages are Albert Bourla telling von der Leyen to be very, very careful, because if she wanted vaccines, if any of us were going to get vaccines, not to start a vaccine trade war.
But Cynthia, she's been very quiet about the case. She didn't really own it. She never showed up in the Commission press room to speak about it. We saw 3 commissioners, but they weren't allowed to mention it. She just left her spokesperson there to kind of mop up the mess and take questions from journalists that weren't really answered. Could she have dealt with it a little bit better?
Absolutely. A very, very strange decision, if it was her decision. And I assume she was involved in making the decision, if not the main player in making the decision. But why were they not disclosed from the get-go? I simply don't understand. My colleague in Renew Europe, Raquel Garcia, she described this decision of the court as a slam dunk for democracy and transparency, and rightly so. I agree with her 100%. A very strange response. Look, it would be different if this was a personal phone. It would be different if she wasn't negotiating issues on behalf of the entire European Union and the citizens in relation to this very important topic. But she wasn't. And therefore, transparency must trump everything. And it's actually in the treaties. We have to abide by the rule of law of transparency.
Eve, is this damaging, do you think, now for Ursula von der Leyen, for the Commission President, or is it more just a kind of a Brussels-y based story?
I think this partly is an old story. We need to remember that at that time Europe improvised, including the Commission. The Commission was not in charge of health, public policy, the vaccine, and it was charged to do so. So there was an improvisation. The procedures are not there. She played a positive role. I would say the EU at large, and there was also Commissioner Breton involved. At the end, they delivered. But legitimacy is not only about, the output. Yeah. It's the input, the way it was done. And it's true that it's not an ideal situation, and it's a good ruling, because for next episode of this type, there will be more cautiousness and more transparency.
Now, did this give a wake-up call to the parliamentarians as well, this ruling?
Well, sorry, Renew Europe, my group, we just had a discussion about it this morning. I mean, a lot of people in the party held with what I've just said about transparency, and we do want to raise this. But obviously, there may be an appeal. We don't know what the Commission are going to do with this, beyond this. So, yes, we are very concerned. But if we are parliamentarians, and if we are acting in that role, everything is on the record. Everything is transparent to do with our job. I don't agree entirely with Bruno when he says, maybe he's a bit jaded after covering Europe for 20 years. I don't agree with him when he says that, it's almost shrouded in secrecy. Because I find my dealings in Parliament on the various committees that I'm on, Bruno, I find them very open.
The Bureau of Parliament never publishes its minutes. The internal audit carried out by the Parliament's auditor, which every year often, well, in fact, more or less every year finds serious instances of wrongdoing, is not published. The audit with names taken out is published of every other EU institution, but not the European Parliament. MPs themselves have to struggle to find out what goes on the bureau of their peers who run the Parliament. This town has lots of problems with openness. I agree with you.
It also has a lot of openness.
I agree with you. I agree that the European Commission has handled this appallingly. We're pretty sure that it wasn't even von der Leyen who wrote the text messages. It's pretty clear they were deleted. The Commission's response to questions by Alexander Fanta to begin with were insulting, plain insulting. So the Commission hopefully will learn a lesson.
Will they learn a lesson?
I really think that the Commission actually is on the more open side.
Is it because the Commission President is trying to control everything inside there?
Yeah, you have the broad picture is a transition. The European construction is diplomacy. Diplomacy is secrecy. But there was a ongoing transition towards more citizens-oriented functioning of the institution. And it means transparency. The accession of the UK was positive. The Nordic countries, because they have different standards in terms of transparency. This is a broad picture. Now, getting back to Mrs. von der Leyen, there is a personal problem. Yes, indeed. Mrs. von der Leyen is too personal a president. The Commission is there. Normally, it's about collective intelligence. You should consult. She's sometimes too selfish. She's a free rider.
Yes, with that.
That might be a problem well beyond the vaccine campaign, and I hope it will help to convince her to be more transparent and also more collective.
Would you agree with that briefly, Cynthia?
I would agree with that. And I'd also agree that she handled, at the end result was very good. Very good. But you're quite right. It's about the inputs, that's the word you used, to get to that end result. But yes, I was very disappointed, for example, at the start of the awful war in Israel and Gaza, very disappointed that she unilaterally almost sided with Israel from the get-go in October after that atrocious Hamas attack. But it was almost a solo run. So again, too personal driven, perhaps.
On that point, we'll have to close this conversation. But for more on that story, do keep an eye on euronews.com. Thank you so much to our panellists, and thank you for watching. See you soon. Hello there, you're watching Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly talk show about the ins and outs of European politics. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with our panel this weekend, Bruno Waterfield, Cynthia Nworku and Eve Bertoncini, we're just taking a look back at the news of the week. And one we wanted to zoom into was this, the Eurovision Song Contest in Basel. The winner, of course, was the Austrian singer JJ, the runner-up Israel's Yuval Rafel. But stealing the spotlight was the protests around the song contest. The politics, meaning the European Broadcasting Union's non-political mantra, is under serious pressure. Police used tear gas and rolled in a water cannon truck to try and block demonstrators from marching through the centre of Basel, which of course was full of revellers and Eurovision fans. Some of the protesters burnt giant Israeli and US flags, and they set off red and green smoke into the air. For more on the controversies around this contest, we spoke to Dean Futalshit. He's a European historian who's actually written a book about the history and politics around the contest.
The European Broadcasting Union has aimed for the contest to be non-political, but politics has always come into the event. I don't think that the European Broadcasting Union has a political mandate to act in this regard. It can suspend a member if a member violates the rules of the organization, but it can't act against a country. That's something that governments do. So there really needs to be a broader context of political action against a country for the European Broadcasting Union itself to be able to act, and for its members to be able to act, because its members don't set the foreign policies of the countries that they represent.
Dean Futalshit there. Bruno, did you watch Did the Right Song Win?
I don't watch Eurovision Song Contest. It has the cultural profundity of the Benny Hill show, as far as I'm concerned. I come from a country that over the last 40 years has had some of the best music in the world, yet what appears at Eurovision is drivel, it's dross, it's unlistenable too. So it's kind of like an appalling, it's a sort of night of bad taste and bad music, as far as I'm concerned.
Bruno, not holding
But in
back
terms
there.
of the politics in this discussion, it is important, because what we're essentially is being talked about through the rather naff prism of Eurovision is a cultural boycott of Israel. And when you start going into the world of cultural boycotts, you're not just targeting Israel, the state, or even the head of state, Netanyahu, you are targeting that. You end up targeting that society, that culture, literally a cultural boycott. You end up targeting Israelis, you end up targeting Jews. I think one of the things I found most sort of jarring about the Eurovision Song Contest discussion was you had a performer from Israel who narrowly escaped with her life when a music festival was attacked in a pogrom by Hamas terrorists, and yet the indifference to that experience, I would have thought, given what Eurovision is, isn't it rather glorious to have someone
Eve,
like that?
let's bring you in there. What are your thoughts? Was it fair to single her out as if she was a representative of the Netanyahu government?
No, of course she was not. And I understand the protest again, Netanyahu government policy, but not this way. First, I must say. Second, I don't understand what Israel in the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't even understand what Australia is in the Eurovision. And I like Eurovision because precisely it's one of the only moments when there is kind of popular feeling of belonging. I understand that the music level, this is not the Beatles, of course, and Oasis and all this,
Rashid
of course.
Tahar
But yes, so I'm quite positive about Eurovision, but I would like it to be between Europeans, and then, of course, in a spirit of openness, cooperation, with no politicization, even if...
Well, indeed, that's what it was created to do, so you can sit back, relax on a Saturday
Yes.
night and enjoy the show and the spectacle. And we actually have a fun fact for our viewers, because Cynthia Nworku, MEP here, actually presented the Eurovision Song Contest back in 1994. You can see it there on the screens, looking spectacular there.
Wow. Spectacular indeed.
So there you go. So Cynthia, how has the contest changed since you fronted the show there back in the 90s to today, 2025, when we see those images outside Basel?
Oh, it's changed a lot. But can I just say, I don't recognise the Eurovision that Bruno has described. And I have to say, I think Eurovision is wonderful. It's wonderful from a performance, a cultural, a design, design, a creative point of view, everything that's wonderful about arts. I love the arts. I distinguish between arts and politics. I don't believe in bans. I think it would have been awful to have singled out that young lady whose history was carefully described there by Bruno, and rightly so, and more attention should have been paid to that and her surviving that awful attack by Hamas. But we shouldn't single out artists, and we shouldn't blame them for the mistakes of political leaders or armies directed by political leaders. Of course, she doesn't represent Netanyahu or the decision of Netanyahu. What was a little bit strange, I thought Saturday night's show was fabulous. I thought Basil did a fantastic show. I think Bruno should be locked in a room and he should be
with you. Maybe you can join next year
for 24
to
hours.
watch it together in Vienna.
We can watch Eurovisions back to back for the last 10 years, because it sounds like he's a bit out of kilter. He's a bit out of touch with it. But I do think that it's really important to bring cultures together. I disagree with Eve as well. I think it's wonderful that we have Israel in it, and Australia and other countries. I condemn the actions of Israel on a political front, but on a cultural front, I think art is above politics. Culture and art is above politics. And remember, these are youngsters who are competing. These are artists whose living is so difficult to make a living, and they need to be given an opportunity to shine. And what better and bigger stage than Eurovision to shine on?
And you could see that emotion in their faces.
Absolutely.
For anyone who watched those images last week.
But again, this is popular Europe. Oh, I may give you the point on Israel, because after all, Israel is also in the Champions League competition, the football, but not Australia. Sorry, it's too far. And when I see that for the European Rugby Championship, we have now South African countries in this competition. This is not normal. There are not that many moments or competition where the Europeans can feel a belonging to the same continent, be there in the EU or not.
Yeah. It's a wonderful
Eurovision
celebration.
Is one of these.
And
so
it really does.
And but yet a week later we're talking about the votes and the political issues around it as opposed to the music.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about the music from my point.
Try and get over that, Bruno. Talk about the voting then.
The EBU is basically a bunch of mainly men in suits who run television broadcasters. They're executives, and they make a lot of money out of it. They make a lot of money out of that telephone voting. That's why it's not a real vote. It's not like a democratic vote or context. I suspect sometimes they put their thumbs on the scale.
It's a bit too bah humbug for
too.
me. It's a wonderful celebration of being European. And if we can sell the European positive message to other countries and unite people, that's a great thing.
And we'd love to hear what you think about the Eurovision. Let us know here on Brussels, my love, at euronews.com. But for now, thank you so much to our panellists, Bruno Waterfield, Cynthia Nwerku and Eve Berconcini. Thanks for being with us. And thank you for watching. Take care and see you very, very soon here on Euronews.